The book was more of a marketing endeavor than a true history of the frontier. Before Crockett, there was Shute, Asa Shute, or as the Cherokees knew him, Shute. And like the gangly bird, he was hard to catch. Before Asa Shute, there was Daniel Boone. It was Daniel Boone who discovered and advertised the Cumberland Gap. The highway through the Appalachian Mountains allowed pioneers to move their families from Virginia and Pennsylvania to Tennessee and Kentucky. Boone's exploits were achieved almost 40 years before Asa Shute began his scouting. Both men came from Scotch-Irish stock, with some Quaker blood mixed in, and both were born in Pennsylvania. Asa, like Boone, came from a large family that moved and stayed close together. Asa's father, Philip Shute Sr., had great influence on all of his sons. There were 6. For his middle son, Asa, he allowed and nurtured the natural inclination to explore his surroundings. So it was in 1784 that Asa, as a teenager, received the first book about his hero, Daniel Boone. That book being John Filson's Discovery, Settlement, and Present State of Kentucky. Filson's book was more of a marketing endeavor than a true history of the frontier. Nevertheless, the Shutes were sold on the idea of new land waiting to be claimed. That's not the exact title. The exact title is The Discovery, Settlement, and the Present State of Kentucky, and an essay toward topography and natural history of that important country. Thus, the Shutes were sold on the idea of new land waiting to be claimed, and as a group, they were very early in the migration west. They passed through Kentucky and settled 2 to 5 miles southwest of Nashboro, or Nashville, that area being rolling hills covered by the blue-green grass that the buffalo munched before the whites killed them off. In those rolling hills, the Shutes divided up numerous blocks of acreage and set up their idea of a plantation. Mostly they raised livestock, particularly horses. The Tennessee pioneers and the farmers needed fast horses to outrun the baby killer, Doublehead. So what is it about John Filson's book that's so odd? The long title? No. Don't make your title that long. Keep it short, keep it pithy. Davy Crockett understood this. The name of his book was Davy Crockett, His Own Story. That's ballsy. In 1834 he wrote that book. He died 2 years later. But he knew how to do a book, and that's where the coonskin cap started. In the 1970s, as a young boy, I watched reruns of Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone. That character was played by Fess Parker. I didn't know Fess Parker, and by the way, Fess Parker's no kin to us as far as I know. But odder things have happened, and we're not kin to Tecumseh, but we may be to the Colberts. Off track. Fess Parker became my idea, Boone and Crockett. And that's where the coonskin cap gets pulled into this. Apparently, Boone never wore one, that's for sure. Davy Crockett did wear one, but he wore it in Philadelphia on stage. And that's how the coonskin cap got to this. It's been said that actually possum caps are warmer, and they actually look better, believe it or not. But in 1780s, early 80s, Boone and Filson met. They must have been in Kentucky. They sat around a campfire. Now they were both doing surveying in Kentucky. Boone had lots of stories, Filson didn't. He was a school teacher from Chester County, that's South Pennsylvania, and also a surveyor. A school teacher and a surveyor. He didn't look the part. He looked the part of a school teacher, but not the hunter, not the surveyor. Anyway, Boone laid all these stories to Filson. Now, Filson's desire was to sell land in Kentucky. Both of them, that was their desire. Filson wanted to write the book. He was already writing it, and he was explaining about the land and the Indians and the rivers. He even drew a map. I mean, Crockett never drew a map, and neither did Boone. They couldn't barely write well. Boone was whittling on trees, D. Boone, he even spelt his name wrong. Killed a bar, B-A-R. They found that on a tree in 1784. No, 1804. So what is it about these books? Filson's book and Crockett's book, what's in between? Here's the thing. Filson needed a stunt double. That was Daniel Boone. He was a good-looking man, Daniel Boone was. Had great hair, and he had stories. One of those stories was he went missing. What happened was he got captured by the Shawnees. And the Shawnee chief, we find out, liked Daniel Boone. And he named him Big Turtle. Big Turtle. What they don't tell you is this. Daniel Boone had to run the gauntlet That's where the Indians line up and you run through it. You've seen this on TV. Apparently, all Indian tribes all over America did this. The chief called him Big Turtle. And all you can think is, well, he didn't run the gauntlet. He fell into a fetal position and took a beating. And he did it well. And so the Indian chief favored him. Or was it the squaw? Because for 2 years he lived with them and he was married. This is not about Essie eggs. What was Boone doing with the Shawnees for 2 years? And when he left, did a squaw chase him home? Then when he got home, this is really something outside that nobody knows about. This is family tradition. His wife, Rebecca, had a baby while he was gone. And Rebecca said, "We thought you were dead. This is your brother's child." So they're sitting around this campfire, and Filson's looking at Boone, and he says, "I got to tell these stories, Daniel." So Daniel allowed Filson to use his stories. Never got paid for it. You can look it up. He never did. Boone did get in trouble with the law, I said in the first chapter. He was moving to Missouri in 1800, went through Nashville. They were after him. There was a warrant for him. He had numerous court cases coming after him, and that's why he moved across the river. That's all been known. Filson did the same thing. Filson in trouble for his real estate nonsense. There were no code enforcement, by the way. These men were marking trees. They're counting rods, surveying stuff that, I guess that's why we did algebra and geometry, but still, I'm like, I just want to plant something, right? Get some dirt on me. I wasn't interested in that part of the book. But Filson wrote all that up. And all those real estate holdings that Filson did, they came under scrutiny too. Because the states, such as Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, they claimed all that land as being theirs. Sure, the Shawnee and the Chickasaw and the Cherokees were on it, but that was only their hunting territory. I mean, we didn't really take their homes. We just took they weren't really using it as well as we did. We used it. So I digress. Filson got in some trouble. And so he kind of set off for Ohio. He was going to do what he had done in Kentucky out towards Ohio. The Shawnees are in Ohio. So in Ohio in 1788, Filson takes off looking at land. He even went and set up Cincinnati somehow or another. He drew up the streets, but he disappeared. Went and asked the Shawnees, and the Shawnees had no idea. Of course, Tecumseh, young Tecumseh was 20, and he may have had something to do with it. There's nothing written about that, but Filson disappeared and he never showed up again, not even a scalp. So while Filson's away, his book becomes big reading. Everybody's getting the book. You ever seen the book? You get the book? Yeah, I got the book. Well, the Shutes are living in Fayette County. That's Philip Shute's family and all of his kids. He got a lot of them. And the middle child is Asa. He's the wild guy. He's the guy that likes to go outside and stays outside. You don't know when he's coming in. But he also was well read, and he could add. He knew algebra and he knew geometry, but he liked to be outside. And Philip Shute, his father, got him the book. So Asa Shute grows up with this book. He also grows up with the history of Filson disappearing and Boone disappearing and the Shawnees and the dangers of the wilderness. And that's an adventure for him. He thinks that's great. So Asa decides he'll become a surveyor too. To make a long story short. But so it was, as Asa grew older into a teenager, about 15, he grew tall and lanky. He was fast, and he had a great mop of hair. He didn't look like Filson. Didn't look like Filson at all. He looked more like Boone and maybe Johnny Depp, because it was Johnny Depp that played Ichabod Crane. And if you look up Washington Irving, you'll find out he got it from history. In 1820, he wrote The Tale of Sleepy Hollow. In that book, he describes Ichabod Crane. And Ichabod Crane was Filson, a school teacher that went missing, knocked his head off. We don't know what happened to him. And the pumpkin, was Pumpkin Boy in this somehow? I don't know. Pumpkin head, Ichabod Crane, a horse running. You do it. Add it up. Back to Asa, the long, lanky kid that loved to run in the woods. He had a great mop of hair. best representative of a shoot would be the famous shoot in Massachusetts in the early 1700s, that being Samuel Shute, the provincial governor of Massachusetts. The king made him that. He was there during the 9 Years' War, one of those European wars that you don't understand what's going on with it, but it's always the French against the English, and what happens is the war goes from Europe to America, and all of a sudden the Scotch-Irish are getting scalped and the Indians are getting killed. And this is when the Shawnees first got really angry. So Samuel Shute was as the beginning of this. Samuel Shute never married, never had children, so you don't hear anything else about him, but he is a cousin to our Shutes that lived in Fayette County, Pennsylvania. Fayette County being named for Lafayette, the Frenchman that helped us during the Revolutionary War. War that was set off by taxes and land brings us back to Fayette County. In 1791, there's an insurrection in America. We're broke, need taxes. They tax the Scotch-Irish for the whiskey they produce, because the tycoons on the coast didn't make good moonshine. They didn't know how and they didn't have time, but they sure could drink it. You're gonna tax that whiskey? That made the Scotch-Irish mad. In Fayette County and all those southern counties, that's where the Whiskey Rebellion was. You may have heard of it. And that rebellion brought George Washington out of retirement to be a general again. He was president, but now he's a general, the Generalissimo. They march on Pennsylvania. They put the insurrection down. The insurrectionists are arrested. Some are threatened to be hung. Some are put in jail, but they all get out, some of them. 2 years after the insurrection is put down, in 1796, somewhere between 1794, when the Whiskey Rebellion ends, in 1796, the Shutes, as a whole clan, all the brothers, all the sisters, move south from Pennsylvania all the way across Kentucky, across the Cumberland River to French Lick, hashtag Nashboro, Nashville. These are the early settlers of Nashville. There were 350 people in Nashville in 1800. This is a small group of people. The Shutes are among those. And the other founders, you got the Hardings and all these other Witherspoon, all these names married into the Shutes. The Shutes built cabins. Now, maybe they weren't the best carpenters, maybe they hired some, but these cabins were built south of Nashville, and they called them plantations, but they were little more than cabins. Even Jackson started out in a cabin. And this is where Shute, Asa, as a 20-year-old man, maybe 26, unmarried, he has his own plantation. And that's when, in 1800, he decided he would become a long hunter, a trader, a trapper, a surveyor, we're not sure which, that he disappears. Just like Filson, just like Boone, and Crockett too, we'll find out later. All four of these men went missing. Some came back, some didn't. Actually, 2 came back, 2 didn't. The Tennessee Gazette, Wednesday, May 14th, 1800. A letter from Natchez dated April the 28th mentions that a gentleman arrived there from New Orleans and informs that several boats from the western country have been cut from that place, and that several men were found murdered and mangled in a horrid manner, and that a Mr. Shute from this district was missing. In the winter of 1799 to 1800, Daniel Boone passed the torch, as they say, to Asa Shute. It was not their first meeting, it was their last. Daniel Boone went to Missouri, and Asa Shute headed south. Almost without a doubt, Daniel Boone warned Asa about marking trees, writing down where and what rods and how far. The main thing that he wanted him to do was, when you get done, go to the courthouse and file your claim and go to the right state. You had to go to the right state. That was the key. And also, he warned him, cut that hair. When Asa went missing in 1800, it was when the leaves were growing thick. That time in North America, the land between Maury County and the Gulf Coast is not America's land. It would be, and there would be a Natchez Trace. But in 1800, when Asa Shute was doing his travels towards Natchez and New Orleans and wherever he went, that wasn't our land. And it was a dangerous patch of ground. It was dangerous in 1812 and 1814, but in 1800, this was one dangerous place. You got a lot of things going on. You got the Creeks to the east, and they can decide to come up on the trail anytime and take somebody. You got the Choctaws down south, they can do the same. You got renegades, Chickasaw renegades, Choctaws. It was a dangerous place. You got land pirates. I mean, why are the Indians the only ones doing this? It's a fact that any white men were down there. They may dress like Indians, but they weren't Indians, and they were robbing and killing people. A lot of people went missing, you just don't hear about it. When you go missing, you go missing. Who knew you, right? just showed up. There's also con men. They're reported on the Natchez Trace. One couple in particular, man and a wife with a slave. And what they would do was they would come across a fellow traveler, travel together for safety. They would get into camp. They would wake up the next day and the slave, during the night, had stolen the other guy and run off. Well, the couple, what can they do? He's a slave. He took off with their stuff. And so, as they look and they can't find him, and time's a wasting. Could be an Indian down the way, you gotta go. You take off, you separated. The slave got away. But did he get away? And why is this man's wife, the woman with him, was named Miranda, some Spanish name? Look it up in genealogy. We didn't name people Miranda. Miranda is a Spanish name. Anyway, I digress. And Mahone, who the hell's Mahone? Many would think that Davy Crockett would have been a part of this, that he was somewhere nearby. He was 14 at the time, but he was nowhere nearby. He was in East Tennessee, and his father, not basically, but did sell him as a slave. He was an indentured servant, which basically is a slave. His dad had run up some debt, put Crockett to work for another man. And I've often had the same idea. That's plan B. I digress. It's not likely Boone had gone past Davidson County, though he was moving to Missouri, and the reasons were because he was trying to get away from civilization. There were too many new settlers coming into Tennessee and Kentucky. It's suspicious that he didn't go south towards the Tennessee River, down towards Alabama. He didn't go that way. He went across that river to Missouri. Again, why anybody would live in Missouri, I have no idea. You can't grow anything, it's rocky dirt. It was 1800, and Asa was gonna set out for Natchez. How he got there, I'm not sure. Did he go down the Cumberland and then decide to come up, or did he go down and come up by water? And it doesn't really appear like he was with the boats they're talking about in the 1800 article. It's more like he's he's out running on his own. Did he have anybody with him? We know he had a slave named George. Probably had at least one helper, and that had to be George. And they were on horseback, wherever he went missing, or however. And significantly, 1800, the turn of the century, Thomas Jefferson's working on a deal with Napoleon to get the Louisiana Purchase. We've discussed that. Natchez is at the heart of it. Natchez has been there since the early 1700s. It's been Spanish, it's been French, and obviously Stephen is in this area. This is 1800, 8 years before we find out about Stephen. And what's he doing? Couldn't have been anything good. And he had to be living with the Creeks, and the Creeks are to the east. So this trail that goes out of Colbert's town there, Chickasaw Landing, from there to Natchez is troublesome. So back to the coonskin cap. Here's why they had the coonskin cap. It was Asa Shute. Indians didn't write down anything. They had no paper. They couldn't draw a map. It's another reason why the Natchez Trace was so dangerous. Indians really didn't know what they owned. It depended on the time of the day, and maybe this is our hunting ground. Truthfully, the Indians, they just kind of went where they went, and I digress. One thing the Indians are never given credit for, it's like you're trying not to give them credit. Scalping. Scalping's been going on since who knows when, in Europe, in America, whatever. The Romans probably did it. That's why we can read and write, because of the Romans, but you can look that up. Scalping was something the Indians did well, particularly in 1800, and it was known. To take a scalp, you need a really sharp knife, and you need to be quick, because when you're scalping, that person can turn into like a tadpole, be flopping around. You need to get that skin off quick. It's just so. And then, after you get scalped, if you survive, and you could, you would need, because sun hitting your skull, not good. There's no further record of Asa Shute after 1800 until 1809. In 1809, he shows back up. Those intervening years, what was he doing? Where was he? When did he get back? He obviously survived. We know that. He never married, oddly enough. Wonder white men went missing all the time, and he wouldn't be the first one that ended up with Indian and alive. It happened to Boone. Didn't happen to Filson, but he didn't have good hair. It happened to, well, you got John Smith and Pocahontas. That chief loved him some John Smith, and he loved him some Pocahontas, and they took her to England, and she got a disease and died. So the Indians figured out, if you're gonna marry them, keep them in camp. Don't go back with them, because you'll die. That may be the moral of the story. If you're a squaw, stay home. So going by past history and the knowledge that we have of the Southeast during this time, there are a lot of half-breeds. Half-breeds being half Indian and half white. Yes, there were white men in these camps. The Creeks had numerous white men. One camp named McGilvery, he was actually a chief, he was a white man. There were traders, but more or less, not a whole bunch, but a lot of half-breeds. Something is going on from these long hunters. It's not something that's mentioned. It seems important, though, to have so many half-breeds, and half-breeds were, they didn't like white people. So if their daddies had got their mama pregnant and left them, there's going to be some anger. It's just so. Now, Asa very well could have been saved by the Chickasaws. The Colberts did have an alliance with the Americans. They were always on our side. Revolutionary War, you name it, they'd always stood firm with the Americans. Not the Cherokees, obviously, they didn't. They kept making mistakes and losing, but in the creek. But if Asa was saved by Colbert, he very well could have met Nancy. Obviously, that's where this is leading. You're not a stupid person. You could see this coming. Somewhere between 1800 and 1808, and I think it was probably in 1800, some type of relationship began with Nance. Because by 1808, Nance is really mad. She's sending the beaver guy downriver to get burnt. She's taking shots at her uncle, who probably brought Asa to the camp. You'll never know. Levi could have found him, Levi Colbert. So this must have been the time frame that set up the squaws going to Dover. And these squaws were mad. And how many half-breeds did they have? They had Stephen. Of course, he's a drunk. In 1808, when Nance and Stephen begin their shenanigans, Asa Shute finally shows up in the Tennessee Gazette. Not a big piece. It's talking about land. He's obviously back home. The genealogy or the family lore is he had a plantation. And he died without a will, but he had at least plantation. No wife, never had a wife, and no children.